Eurovision is just around the corner, and Ukraine's a formal winner. But these artists aren't prepping for the world's biggest songfest, they're rocking for the referendum. Technically, Crimea is still a province of Ukraine. But these ethnic Russians are about to vote overwhelmingly to join neighbouring Russia. Not so long ago, seceding from Ukraine would have been unthinkable. Now, Russian unity is all anyone seems to talk about. Just ask the pro-Russian militia, alongside the Cossacks, guarding the buildings of the pro-Russian government.
Yes, these are actual Cossacks, you know, the legendary Russian Cossacks. But we're not one, you know, we're different, we're just volunteers.
The militias were set up in February to defend Crimea against supposed Ukrainian aggression. Cossacks have poured in from southern Russia to back them up.
So they just got on the ferry and came across from Russia?
Ferry, you know, put their papachas on and they showed up.
Fantastic, yeah.
And people love them. People just come and take pictures, and kids love them because we share the same history.
Mikhail Mosin moved to America in the 90s after the Soviet Union fell apart and Russia and Ukraine became separate countries. Now he's scared his homeland is being taken over by fascists.
Ukraine now is in such hard situation with all these strange movements politically, whether they are extreme nationalists or neo-Nazis, I don't know. I just don't want this kind of things happening in Crimea, and that's why I want to give it a chance.
Ukrainian television has been blocked in much of Crimea, but turn on any Russian channel and you'll see Ukraine's capital Kiev is allegedly run by maniacs.
Украина. В результате насильственного захвата власти в страну приходит совсем другой режим, наглый, циничный, жестокий.
Last month's revolution, when mass protests forced out a corrupt pro-Russian president, was seen in the West as a fight for freedom. Russian media say it was a CIA coup that installed a government of neo-Nazis.
Закон, как и любые договоренности, даже при международных гарантиях, для этого режима ничто. Человеческая жизнь, да и самые простые вещи, такие как неприкосновенность жилища, язык, культура, права человека и гражданские свободы тоже.
It was the pretext for Moscow flooding Crimea with troops to protect ethnic Russians. In almost 2 decades covering the former Soviet Union, this is one of the most extraordinary things I've seen. With breathtaking speed, Russian President Vladimir Putin has organised an armed takeover of part of a neighbouring country. He's even staged a referendum to make it look legal. And Ukraine, in fact the whole of Europe and the US, have been impotent to stop him. There are now fears he'll do the same thing in eastern Ukraine, where ethnic Russians also dominate.
Putin already promised that if any Russians would be, attacked in Ukraine, anywhere, then they will take measures. So that's why, people who control Kiev now, they're not going to do anything about that. Otherwise, chances are they may not control Kiev for long.
Crimea holds a special place in the hearts of Russian nationalists. Most believe it should never have been governed by Ukraine in the first place. Imperial Russia conquered the Crimean Peninsula way back in the 18th century. In 1922 it was swallowed up in the Soviet Union, which united Russia and Ukraine under communism. For many decades, Crimea was the Soviet Union's favourite holiday spot. Millions would come to enjoy its warm summers and Black Sea beaches. Others could enjoy it through cheesy Soviet movies.
Доктор, можно к вам обратиться? Попробуйте. Вот я смотрю на вас и думаю, что если бы все милиционеры были на вас похожи?
Как? Вы меня уже узнали?
When Yevgeny Snezhkin was born here in 1951, Crimea was still part of Soviet Russia. But when he was 3, the Soviet leadership transferred Crimea to Soviet Ukraine. Back then, it hardly mattered. Borders were just lines on a Soviet map.
We didn't consider different country. Russia, what we call now Russia, we didn't consider. All of us were living in the same big and good country, Soviet Union.
Понятно. Сколько стоит?
Yevgeny grew up enjoying Crimea's culture and its surprisingly fine wine. But when he turned 40, the Soviet Union disintegrated and Russia and Ukraine became separate nations. Russian Crimeans found themselves stranded in a foreign country.
And I felt kind of offended because nobody asked me if I want to change citizenship. Nobody asked me if I want Soviet Union broke up.
Unlike some Russian speakers, he soon got used to being Ukrainian. Now 63, Yevgeny loves Crimea, whichever country it's in. But he's appalled by how Putin is dragging it back to Russia.
But I am not agree with the way Crimea joining Russia.
Why not?
I said not joining. Well, it's a Anschluss German word.
Mm-hmm. That's a pretty strong comparison. That was Hitler who took over.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Took over Austria.
Yep. It is. Everyone made the parallel between those events in 1938 and now.
Up on the city square, these Russian speakers are desperate for Putin's embrace. They've bought his pitch that Ukraine and many Ukrainians are a dangerous threat.
Что вы думаете о новой власти в Киеве?
В Киеве мы насмотрелись, что они творили 3 месяца, убивали людей, жгли Беркут. Мы не хотим, чтобы у нас в Крыму была эта власть. Мы ее считаем нелегитимной. Вот. Да, мы их не выбирали, они пришли путем вооруженного переворота.
Crimea is on the defensive.
Russian TV networks and the Kremlin-funded foreign service, Russia Today, have been showing Crimeans preparing for a Ukrainian invasion.
But if you want peace, prepare for war.
It reminds me of the propaganda of Soviet time now. They tell about the same thing many times. Fascist, fascist, fascist. They don't tell about other opinions.
Rather than gearing up for a fight, Ukraine has ordered its soldiers in Crimea to stand down. Pro-Russian militias have surrounded Ukrainian bases, demanding they hand over their weapons. At this base, we had an interview arranged with the Ukrainian general. The volunteer militia wouldn't let us in, and they wouldn't let the general out to talk to us. They even called reinforcements.
I hope they've got enough guys because there are 3 of us and only about 65 of them now, so...
If anything, it's ethnic Ukrainians who have reason to be frightened. Victoria Polishchuk braved one of the few demonstrations here against joining Russia.
My family is scared about me. They know that I'm a patriotic person and that I have pro-Ukrainian mood, and they are afraid don't speak Ukrainian outside. They are afraid don't take your camera with you. They will think you're media, they will beat you.
The rally marked the 200th anniversary of the birth of Doroschenko, Ukraine's most beloved poet.
All his poetry is about our freedom and how we should fight for it.
But in deference to her parents, she promises to keep a low profile for now.
I respect my family. I don't want to make the troubles for them. Okay, I said I will live here for now just as a normal citizen, but I cannot stop thinking about how they are humiliating us.
Just meters away stood a group of ethnic Russians, seemingly itching for a fight. They tried to find a way in that wasn't blocked by police, but were kind enough to speak to us as they left.
А? Хорошо, под нашим контролем, мы держим всегда. Вот. Все, будет мир, все, в России мы. Враг не пройдет никогда. Аллаху Акбар,
Ethnic Ukrainians aren't the only ones worried about being seen as enemies. This is Bakhchisarai, the former capital of Crimea when Muslim Tatars ruled the peninsula. Tsarist Russia deposed their leaders in the 18th century. In the 20th century, Soviet bureaucrats forced them onto collective farms.
Никогда мы не хотели и не будем отделяться к России.
Yakub Alpazov came to hate Russian interference in Tatar culture and religion. But that wasn't Moscow's greatest crime.
Здравствуйте.
He introduces me to Igor Aga, a survivor of a little-known genocide. In 1944, the Soviet dictator Stalin deported the entire Tatar population to Central Asia in fear they'd join the Nazis.
8 лет хорошо помню, где помню, как в телячьи вагоны, грузовые вагоны, это. И пока с Крыма не выехали, трое суток двери не открывали. Двери не открывали. А когда уже за Крым выехали, через трое суток 30 сантиметров двери приоткрылись.
Half of them died of starvation and disease before the survivors were allowed back in the 1990s. At least now they can practice their faith in this 300-year-old mosque. In Soviet times it was used as a disco. Yakub is praying Moscow won't rule here again.
Он какой человек, Путин?
Страшный, тяжелый и с амбициями. Демократии у него в голове вообще нету нигде. Но на данный момент сейчас очень серьезное отношение к тому, что происходит с нашей Родиной. Потому что сюда зашли агрессоры с автоматами. И вот диктуют нам те условия, которые в 1941 году Гитлер диктовал всему миру. Вот примерно то же самое.
Half an hour's drive south in the naval port of Sevastopol, people see history very differently. This was a place of Russian heroism, from conquering savage Muslims to fighting British invaders in the Crimean War. It was also one of the bloodiest battlegrounds of World War II, when Soviet troops and sailors fought bravely against Nazis, the real ones. Unscrambling the Soviet legacy won't be easy. This was the headquarters of the Soviet Black Sea Fleet, the greatest projection of communism's naval power. Now, after the Soviet Union dissolved, Russia and Ukraine agreed to split the fleet between them, Moscow renting its facilities from Kiev. So today you have Russian and Ukrainian ships virtually side by side, many with commanders who served together in the same navy. Now, of course, they're on opposing sides. The separatist Crimean government says Ukraine's soldiers and sailors must make a choice: switch sides to Russia or leave Crimea. Ukraine looks set to not only lose the hundreds of millions of dollars Russia's been paying in rent, but its main naval port. The dream for ethnic Russians is that Crimea can return to its former greatness, when it was Mother Russia's defender and her playground. They say that since Ukraine became independent 23 years ago, Kiev has been stealing all its riches.
They just took money from us, and our infrastructure is falling apart. Lots of our buildings need to be renovated. Healthcare is terrible. Pensions are very, very poor. We don't like that, and we think with Moscow's support, will be able to rebuild our status as a favorite spot for all the Russians to come and enjoy it. You know, the weather, the sunshine, and of course the wine.
Now, a lot of Western media says that this is all being directed by Putin and that Moscow has organised all this. Is that true?
Well, if I were Putin, I would do the same. I mean, come on, this is a prime real estate. Why not? I mean, he built a whole new city around Sochi just for the Olympics. That guy is not stupid.
In one sense, you can hardly blame Crimeans for wanting to leave Ukraine. This is the Ukrainian parliament in action, seen here in 2010 discussing whether to extend Russia's naval lease. Since independence, Ukraine's political leaders have been as dysfunctional as they were corrupt. By the end of last year, Ukrainians in the capital Kiev were finally held. They took over the main square known as Maidan and staged 3 months of often violent protest. They succeeded in ousting a blatantly pro-Russian president who had set new standards for plundering the state. More than 100 protesters and 16 police were killed.
We're the 10th generation from about 400.
Demjin Doroschenko is a descendant of one of Ukraine's noble families and a first-generation Australian.
Yeah, I was quite surprised.
We met him in Kiev, where he'd come for a family Christmas visit and stayed on to join the demonstrations against the teetering government. He was in the thick of the violence, helping the protesters get the pictures out to the world.
We were deliberately shot with rubber bullets. We were deliberately tear gassed with tear gas grenades. We deliberately had concussion grenades thrown at us. And this went on for days and days and days.
Well, given the difficulties and the danger, why did you continue to be here?
For me, it's a passionate nationalistic feeling I have for Ukraine, and wanting to help Ukraine and to do whatever I can with my skills, my knowledge, my education.
Demjin has seen many of his fellow protesters die. This is the latest victim, a man who succumbed to gunshot wounds after weeks in hospital.
Every death affects you right here.
But he concedes that not all of the protesters were freedom-loving Democrats. Among their ranks were radical nationalists, even neo-Nazis. Some extremists have been given positions in the interim government until elections are held in May.
I can't deny it, and there is some ultra-nationalists. I mean, with any organisation or any social group, you do get people who are ultra-nationalists and who, believe that, we'll get rid of the Jews, get rid of the Russians, and just have only Ukrainians in Ukraine. I mean, there are several groups like that. We don't subscribe to their opinions and to their way of thinking.
Are people in Crimea then right to be slightly worried about what's happened here, to feel that they are somewhat threatened?
No, that's perpetrated really by the Russian media. Even though the ultra-nationalists are around, they aren't threatening them. We don't see them going out and going down to Crimea and bashing up, Russians in Crimea, or going to Kharkiv and bashing up, Russians in Kharkiv or Donetsk or somewhere like that.
To make sure no supporters of the new government could reach Crimea, the local pro-Russian government locked down the province ahead of its controversial referendum on secession. Cars and trains from Kiev were searched, flights were cancelled. Outside observers weren't welcome. Billboards painted the referendum as a stark choice between living under Ukrainian fascism or Russian protection. Crimean Tatars, remembering Moscow's mass deportations, refused to vote, lining the roads in protest. But ethnic Russians turned out en masse.
We returned home. We were waiting for this day for many, many years.
There was no way of voting to stay in Ukraine. The options were independence in all but name or joining Russia. And to absolutely nobody's surprise, the result was overwhelmingly in favour of joining Russia. Spontaneous celebrations erupted, with security provided by Russian nationalists. It remains to be seen if Russia can bring peace and prosperity to Crimea in a union almost no other country will recognise. Yevgeny Snezhkin intends to stay here, even if Crimea becomes an international pariah. After all he's seen, it will take more than a global crisis to make him leave his home.
We used to say, life is given just once, and real men should spend it in Crimea.
Well, Yevgeny, thank you very much and best of luck, whatever happens.
You are very welcome. Finish your wine, please.